When Street Fighter III and Capcom Fighting Evolution failed to live up to Capcom's expectations, it seemed as good a time as any for Capcom to take a break from developing more fighting games. This led to a period where Capcom would focus less on games built around the arcade experience and instead on franchises that could thrive on home consoles. Fans of Street Fighter would still be able to get their fighting game fix from Capcom, but in the form of ports, compilations, and updates to past games. Aside from the occasional cameo in Capcom's other video games, this was how Street Fighter continued to thrive. When Noritaka Funamizu and Yoshiki Okamoto departed from Capcom to form their own studios, they took with them the last members of the original Street Fighter II team. Plus, with the company's fighting game department shut down, it seemed likely that there would never be a new installment in the franchise anytime soon. However, there was still a member of the original Street Fighter team that had parted ways with the franchise long ago that still remained at Capcom. With his help, there would still be a chance for Street Fighter to return anew. Keiji Inafune started as a graphic designer at Capcom on the original Street Fighter, but after his rise to fame and success with the Mega Man franchise, he was promoted and would become responsible for many of Capcom's big new franchises. His next big franchise was the Onimusha series, where he served as its producer. Meanwhile, a former sound designer at Capcom named Yoshinori Ono had begun finding success as a producer for games like Shadow of Rome. He was later assigned to work on the fourth installment of the Onimusha series, Onimusha Dawn of Dreams. Being a longtime fan of Street Fighter, Yoshinori Ono chose to add hidden costumes for the main characters in the game, resembling popular Street Fighter characters. After a positive reaction from the fans and press over the Street Fighter skins, Yoshinori Ono took his feedback to Inafune, telling him that it was a sign that people wanted to see a new Street Fighter game. Around the same time, with the rise of downloadable games on the Xbox 360, Capcom announced a new version of Street Fighter II Hyper Fighting that would be available for download and feature online multiplayer. Despite suffering from initial online connection problems, the game instantly became Xbox Live Arcade's fastest-selling game to date. This was no doubt a sign that there were fans out there craving to relive the arcade experience of playing Street Fighter with others once again. Eventually, Keiji Inafune agreed with Yoshinori Ono's proposal and greenlighted the project for a brand new Street Fighter game, placing Ono in charge as its producer. On October 2007, Capcom announced that it would be resurrecting two of its classic franchises. One of them was Bionic Commando and the other was Street Fighter IV. Immediately, fans were excited about the news. It had been 10 years since Street Fighter III made its debut, so the idea of a fourth chapter in the series didn't sound likely, let alone possible. However, some longtime fans had their doubts and questioned what kind of direction the fighting game series would take. Instead of constructing a brand new roster and design for Street Fighter IV, Yoshinori Ono wanted the game to focus on the fan favorites, particularly from the Street Fighter II series in terms of its roster and gameplay elements. So, the fourth chapter of Street Fighter would not leave the 2D plane of combat seen in past games, but still feature full 3D polygonal characters in high definition. Despite using Super Turbo as a starting point, Street Fighter IV would also borrow many elements from other Street Fighter games, but have its own take on it. So while it featured polygonal characters and graphics, something last seen in the Street Fighter EX series, it would have a hand-drawn look to it, last seen from art director and character designer Daigo Ikeno, who worked on Street Fighter III Third Strike. This hand-drawn look would also feature visual effects such as calligraphic strokes and ink smudges that would be seen throughout a fight. From a gameplay perspective, the series' traditional 6-button control scheme would return and feature many gameplay elements similar to Street Fighter III. While the parries from 3 were gone, they were replaced by the saving attacks, also known as focus attacks. When pressing the medium punch and kick buttons simultaneously, the player could absorb certain attacks by an opponent and launch an immediate counterattack. If the player is not immediately attacked afterwards, they can regain the damage the opponent's attack would have given. Otherwise, it would result in the player losing more of their vitality. So while the focus attack was more visible and much easier for players to pull off than the parry move, it still had a risk-reward element to it and offered lots of possibilities and combos. The player would also have to deal with two different power meters. The Super meter works similar to power meters seen in past Street Fighter games. Dealing damage fills the meter, enabling a powered-up EX move at certain intervals and a super combo move when completely filled. The second meter, known as the Revenge Gauge, or meter, would fill whenever the player would take damage from the opponent. When filled enough, the player could pull off a Cinematic Ultra Combo, which was a powered-up version of a character's special move. When early information of Street Fighter IV reached the internet, there was an immense sense of cynicism and skepticism around the project. Some felt that any going back to Street Fighter II would mean that Street Fighter IV would not be a proper evolution from Street Fighter III, and thus not feature as much depth. When first footage of Street Fighter IV was released, people quickly managed to find something to complain about. Some criticized the art style the game was going for because it was not as realistic as other 3D fighting games on the market. In fact, even the thought of Street Fighter IV going 3D instead of 2D had people worried due to past experiences with the Street Fighter EX series. There was enough doubt among fans that they were even divided between each other. Those who wanted an evolution of Street Fighter III wanted something that appeared more complex, and those who didn't wanted to see an evolution to the gameplay mechanics found in the Alpha series or Versus series. Yoshinori Ono was already being pressured with reinvigorating the Street Fighter franchise and possibly the fighting game genre, and when the media began focusing on him during Street Fighter 4's production, the pressure only got worse. Skeptics called him out for his past inexperience with fighting games at Capcom. They would make claims like how his last work on a fighting game scene with Capcom Fighting Evolution and the lack of input from the original people behind Street Fighter 2 were signs that Street Fighter 4 would not only result in a disappointment, but a game that would fail to live up to the Street Fighter name. But unlike Capcom Fighting Evolution, where Yoshinori Ono was sent in to replace the producer who left during its development, Street Fighter 4 was his passion project. As a longtime fan of Street Fighter, Yoshinori Ono just wanted to see the franchise he loved done right. He wanted to take not only what Street Fighter was to him, but what he felt it should be and make that game. So, in the months following its debut, Street Fighter 4 underwent an incredible amount of adjusting and tweaking in every single aspect in order to get it exactly right. Yoshinori Ono was not only backed by a strong and dedicated team at Capcom, but many other areas of support that weren't initially known to the public. Street Fighter 4 was being co-developed between Capcom and DIMS, a company founded by former SNK and Capcom employees, including the co-creators of the original Street Fighter, Takashi Nishiyama and Hiroshi Matsumoto. The game would run on the Taito Type X2 arcade system board, which was also being used to run other fighting games at the time, such as Battle Fantasia, BlazBlue, and the King of Fighters 12. The artwork for the game would be done by Daigo Ikeda, who previously worked on Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, and the game's soundtrack would be composed by Hideyuki Fukasawa, who previously worked on Onimusha Dawn of Dreams. Another key member of the Street Fighter 4 team would not come from a development team, but instead from among the fighting game community. Seth Killian was a college professor of philosophy at the University of Illinois in Chicago and a longtime fan of Capcom and Street Fighter. He was one of the top players in the fighting game community and co-founded the community site Shoryuken.com and Evolution, the largest fighting game tournament in the world. Seth was chosen by Capcom to be the community manager of the Capcom Unity blog and a spokesperson for Capcom among the fighting game community. His contributions would prove to be essential to the development of Street Fighter 4 and the future of many new video games at Capcom. With Street Fighter 4 now pending release from Capcom, there came a sudden rush of new and updated fighting games from the company as well. There was the announcement of a new crossover fighting game with Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, which was an update to Super Turbo designed by Backbone Entertainment and longtime Street Fighter competitor David Sterling, and an update to Marvel vs. Capcom 2 that would feature online multiplayer. But one of the strangest announcements to come from this rush of new fighting games from Capcom was one that was announced for the PC. Street